What would you do if the necklace buried with the love of your life appeared 8 years later around the neck of a struggling single-father billionaire, CEO Madeline Vale, had survived grief by turning every waking hour into work? But inside a rain-soaked Seattle ballroom beneath chandeliers and polite applause, one silver compass shattered the life she had carefully rebuilt. It carried the same dent, the same scratch, and the same promise her late husband once wore against his heart. The man wearing it was Caleb Reed, a widowed father holding his 7-year-old daughter close with sawdust beneath his nails and fear behind his eyes. What followed would uncover a forgotten rescue, a final act of courage, and a truth neither family was prepared to face. Stay until the end. This story may change how you see grief, kindness, and second chances. Like the video and tell us where you are watching from. The silver compass had not simply returned from the dead. It had returned on the chest of a man Madeline Vale had never seen before. Only a few hours earlier, Caleb Reed had been standing beneath a leaking roof in Tacoma, trying to convince himself that he had no place inside a ballroom filled with billionaires. Rain tapped against the metal ceiling of Reed Restoration in a steady rhythm. The narrow workshop smelled of walnut dust, old varnish, and coffee that had been reheated twice and forgotten both times. Caleb stood over a century-old rocking chair beneath the yellow light of a hanging lamp. One of its arms had split cleanly through the middle. Someone else might have replaced the entire piece, sanded away the damage, and made it look new. Caleb did not believe new was always better. He ran his thumb along the crack, feeling the grain beneath the worn surface. Across the room, his daughter, Sophie, sat at a scarred workbench with a math worksheet in front of her and a purple marker tucked behind one ear. She watched him study the chair. "Why do you keep looking at it? I'm listening." "To a chair." Caleb glanced at her. "Old things talk." Sophie narrowed her eyes. "That sounds like something people say when they don't know the answer." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. The chair creaked as he turned it slightly. "It's telling me the break is deeper than it looks." Sophie climbed down from her stool and crossed the workshop in mismatched socks. One had yellow stars, the other had tiny blue whales. She leaned against the work table and inspected the broken arm. "Why don't you just buy a new one?" "Because this one has a history." "But it's broken." Caleb picked up a thin piece of walnut and held it beside the damaged wood. Broken and finished aren't the same thing. Sophie studied his face instead of the chair. "Is that about us?" The question entered the room softly. Caleb lowered the wood. Behind Sophie, near the office door, hung a photograph of Hannah Reed laughing beneath a summer sky. Wind pushed her dark hair across her face. One hand rested on the curve of her pregnant stomach. Sophie had been inside her then. The photograph had been taken before hospital rooms, medication schedules, insurance calls, and the long winter when every conversation began with test results. Caleb looked back at his daughter. "It's mostly about the chair. Mostly." He placed a hand on top of her head. "You ask too many questions before breakfast. It's almost lunch. That explains it." Sophie smiled, but her eyes moved toward the garment bag hanging from a nail beside the office door. Inside was the only suit Caleb owned. It had been purchased for Hannah's sister's wedding almost 6 years earlier. The shoulders were slightly too broad now, and the cuffs had begun to shine from repeated pressing. Caleb had spent part of the morning trying to remove a stain from the lapel with club soda. He had not succeeded. "You're still going tonight," Sophie said. Caleb turned back to the rocking chair. "I'm still considering not going." "You promised." "I said I would think about it." "You thought about it yesterday." "I'm a slow thinker." "You're a scared thinker." The sandpaper stopped in his hand. Sophie did not say it cruelly. She rarely did. She simply noticed things. That was one of the many ways she resembled her mother. Caleb placed the sandpaper on the table. I'm not scared. You cleaned your shoes 3 times. They needed cleaning. You never cleaned them. That is not true. You wore sawdust to my school meeting. I didn't wear it. It followed me. Sophie folded her arms. The invitation to the children first benefit rested on the desk behind them. It had arrived through the Harbor Street Community Center where Caleb volunteered on Tuesday evenings. The center had asked him to speak about raising a child after losing a spouse. The event would be held at Harbor Light Pavilion in downtown Seattle. There would be company founders, politicians, athletes, actors, and people whose names appeared on buildings. Caleb had almost thrown the invitation away. Then Sophie had found it. She had read every word, including the sentence about the formal dress code. You help people at the center, she said. Why don't you want to help people at the fancy place? Because people at fancy places already think they know how to help. Maybe they don't. They usually have speeches about it. You have a speech, too. I have a folded piece of paper I'm hoping to lose. Sophie walked toward the office and picked up the invitation. Mom would make you go. Caleb looked at Hannah's photograph again. Your mom made me do a lot of things. She was usually right. Unfortunately. Sophie held the invitation against her chest. She said stories help people feel less alone. Caleb had not realized Sophie remembered that. Hannah used to say it during the worst weeks of treatment. She had said it to nurses, friends, and strangers in waiting rooms. She had said it after Sophie fell asleep against her shoulder while an infusion pump clicked beside the bed. Stories help people feel less alone. Caleb exhaled and looked toward the rain sliding down the workshop windows. Fine. Sophie's face brightened. But if anyone asks me to dance, we leave immediately. What if they ask me, you can dance? I cannot. You jump around in the kitchen. That is not dancing. That is trying not to burn pancakes. She ran across the room and wrapped her arms around his waist. Caleb closed his eyes. For one quiet second, the workshop felt less empty. Then Sophie pulled back. You should shave. The moment ended. Caleb looked toward a cracked mirror near the sink. I shaved yesterday. You missed today. By late afternoon, the rain had softened to a silver mist. Caleb stood in the workshop office, buttoning the same white shirt he had worn to Hannah's funeral. He avoided looking at the collar. Sophie sat on the edge of an old filing cabinet in a pale blue dress, borrowed from a neighbor. Her shoes were new. Caleb had bought them 2 sizes too large so she could grow into them. He had filled the toes with tissue. She kicked her feet while he struggled with his tie. You're making it crooked. I know. Do you want help? Do you know how to tie a tie? No. Then we are equally qualified. He loosened it again. On the desk sat a stack of envelopes. The electric bill, the rent notice for the workshop, a repair estimate for the broken dust collection system, a letter from Sophie's school requesting payment for a spring science trip. Caleb had opened that one twice. The cost was not enormous by most standards. To him, it was 3 days of work. He picked up his wallet and counted the bills inside, though he already knew the amount. Sophie watched him in the mirror. I don't have to go on the trip. Caleb looked over his shoulder. Yes, you do. It's just a museum. You love museums. I can look at pictures online. You are going. She did not argue. That made the guilt worse. Caleb opened the top drawer of his desk and removed a small wooden box. Inside lay the silver compass on its worn leather cord. The metal had dulled over the years, but the dark blue face still caught the light. A narrow scratch ran near the clasp. The lower rim carried a dent from the mountain road. He lifted it carefully. Sophie leaned closer. Are you wearing it? I think so. You always wear it when you're nervous. I'm not nervous. You're holding your breath. Caleb let the air out. The compass had no great financial value. He had once taken it to a jeweler who said it was handmade and probably worth several $100s. At the time, Hannah's medical bills had already begun to arrive. He could have sold it. He never seriously considered doing so. The necklace belonged to a knight that had divided his life into two parts: the life before the mountain, the life after it. Before that night, he had believed survival was mostly luck. Afterward, he knew survival sometimes had a face, a voice, a hand that reached into danger and refused to let go. The man who had worn the compass had saved Caleb before Sophie was born. Caleb had never learned his name. After finding the necklace, he and Hannah spent months trying to return it. They called sheriff's offices, hospitals, volunteer rescue groups, and local newspapers. Hannah wrote letters by hand when no one returned their messages. She kept every reply in a blue folder. Most of them said the same thing. No matching report, no confirmed owner, no identifying mark. The engraving on the back had seemed personal but not unique enough to trace. Always find your way home. Hannah had read those words while sitting at their kitchen table, one hand resting over her pregnant stomach. Maybe it found you for a reason, she had said. It didn't find me. I found it in mud. That is less romantic. It was a landslide, Hannah. Still less romantic. She had bought the leather cord the following week. Caleb did not begin wearing it immediately. For years, he kept it in the wooden box with the photograph from the rescue. After Hannah died, he took it out. Some mornings it was the only thing that reminded him he had survived something before. He looped the cord around his neck and tucked the compass beneath his shirt. Sophie watched him close the box. "Do you think the man is still looking for it?" Caleb's hand rested on the lid. "I don't know. Maybe he stopped. Maybe. Would you give it back?" He looked at her. "It was never mine." She nodded as if the answer satisfied her. Then she pointed at his tie. "It still looks bad. 40 miles north." Madeline Vale stood before the windows of her office on the 42nd floor of Vale Horizon headquarters. Seattle spread beneath her in layers of gray water, glass towers, and moving headlights. From that height, the city appeared orderly. Madeline preferred it that way. Her assistant, Nora Parker, stood near the conference table holding a tablet. The acquisition team moved tomorrow's meeting to 8:30. Legal wants your approval on the revised language before the gala. The press office also needs an answer about the education initiative. Madeline signed a document without sitting down. Approve the first version. Reject the revised language. Tell the press office they will have a statement after the board vote. Nora glanced at the rain beyond the windows. "You could leave early." "I could. You won't." "No." Nora knew better than to push. Madeline had built Vale Horizon from a rented office with 3 engineers into one of the largest technology firms on the West Coast. Investors described her as disciplined. Reporters called her relentless. Competitors used less flattering words in private. None of them understood that work had once been ambition. Now it was anesthesia. Madeline returned to her desk. Her office was clean to the point of severity. No family photographs, no souvenirs, no flowers that required watering. Only one drawer was always locked. She opened it with a small key. Inside rested Ethan's wedding ring. Beside it lay a photograph turned face down. Madeline did not pick up either one. She only looked. 8 years earlier, Ethan Vale had left their home before sunrise, wearing a dark rain jacket and the silver compass Madeline had given him during their first year of marriage. He had been called to assist a volunteer emergency team after a storm triggered landslides in the North Cascades. Madeline remembered standing in the kitchen while he filled a thermos. She had been angry before he entered the room. There had been a dinner that night with potential investors. Ethan had promised to attend. Then the emergency call came. "You said this mattered," Madeline had told him. "It does. Not enough." "Maddie." "No." Every time someone needs help, everything else disappears. He had set the thermos down. People are trapped. There are trained rescue teams. They asked for volunteers. They always ask Ethan and you always go. Rain struck the kitchen windows. Ethan looked tired. Not angry. That had somehow made her angrier. I am tired of losing you to people you don't even know. He stepped closer. You're not competing with them. It feels like I am. He touched her face. She turned away. I'll be home tomorrow, he said. Madeline did not answer. He kissed her forehead anyway. Then he left. 2 days later, a state trooper stood outside her front door. Ethan's body had been recovered below a collapsed section of highway. His wallet, watch, and wedding ring had been returned in a sealed plastic bag. The compass was missing. Madeline had given it to him after their first anniversary. The back plate carried 4 words she had chosen because Ethan had no natural sense of direction. Always find your way home. He used to tap the compass before leaving on trips. Insurance, he would say. Madeline had searched the recovery inventory herself. She called county offices, state patrol park services, and volunteer groups. Nothing. For years she imagined it buried beneath stone. Sometimes she dreamed that Ethan was walking through the rain toward home following its needle. She always woke before he reached the door. Nora's voice returned her to the office. The car is downstairs. Madeline closed the drawer. Give me 5 minutes. The Harbor Light Pavilion glowed against the darkening waterfront. By the time Caleb and Sophie arrived, the front entrance was crowded with black cars and umbrellas held by uniformed attendants. Caleb parked his truck 3 blocks away because he refused to pay $40 for valet service. They walked through the rain beneath an umbrella with one broken rib. Sophie held the invitation inside her coat. When they reached the entrance, she looked up at the chandeliers visible through the glass. Do rich people always have ceilings that sparkle only when they want you to forget how much the floor cost? She did not understand the joke, but she laughed anyway. Inside, an attendant asked for their names. Caleb gave them. The woman checked her list, then looked at his suit. Only for a second. Caleb noticed. Sophie noticed him noticing. She slipped her hand into his. The ballroom opened before them in gold light and polished marble. White orchids rose from glass tables. A string quartet played near a staircase. Servers moved through the crowd carrying silver trays. Caleb felt sawdust beneath one fingernail and curled his hand into a fist. Sophie stared at a tower of desserts. Can we eat those? Probably not. Why? Because they look expensive. That means we should eat more. For the first time that evening, Caleb relaxed. Near the stage, Madeline moved from one donor to another with effortless precision. She shook hands, remembered names, and accepted praise without seeming to need it. From a distance, Caleb recognized her from magazine covers. Madeline Vale. The woman whose company was worth more money than Caleb could imagine. He expected arrogance. Instead, he saw exhaustion around her eyes. When the event director called his name, Caleb's stomach tightened. Sophie squeezed his fingers. Tell the toast story. I was planning to. You were planning to read the boring paper. Caleb looked at the folded speech in his pocket. She was right. On stage, the lights were brighter than he expected. He could not see most of the audience. Only outlines, glass tables, raised faces, Sophie in the first row. He unfolded the speech, then folded it again. My daughter was 4 when her mother died, he began. The room settled. The morning after the funeral, Sophie asked for toast cut into stars. Her mother always made it that way. Caleb looked toward his daughter. I tried. Every star broke. A few people smiled. I was tired. I was angry. I had not slept. I remember looking at those pieces of bread and thinking I had failed at the first thing she asked me to do without her mother. Sophie's eyes remained on him. So we ate the pieces. The ballroom became quiet. That became our rule. When life will not stay in the shape you wanted, you do not throw it away. You learn how to live with the pieces. At the edge of the room, Madeline stopped speaking to the donor beside her. Caleb continued. He spoke about the neighbor who left groceries outside their door without signing a note, the nurse who sat beside Sophie while Caleb said goodbye to Hannah, the mechanic who repaired his truck and refused payment because he had once lost a wife too. He did not speak about courage as something grand. He spoke about people showing up. Hope is rarely one enormous rescue, Caleb said. Most of the time it is someone arriving before you know how to ask. Madeline felt the words reach a place she kept closed. Applause rose as Caleb stepped away from the microphone. Sophie met him near the stage and threw her arms around him. You didn't read the boring paper. No, you were good. I forgot half of it. That was the good half. He lifted her into his arms. His jacket shifted. The silver compass slipped free from beneath his collar. Across the ballroom, Madeline saw it. For one heartbeat, every sound disappeared. She saw the dark blue face, the dent along the lower rim, the scratch near the clasp. Her champagne glass trembled against her fingers. She set it down before it fell. Caleb turned toward the exit, Sophie still in his arms. Madeline crossed the ballroom. People called her name. She did not stop. Caleb lowered Sophie when he saw her approaching. Madeline halted in front of him. Up close, she could see the wear on the leather cord and the years pressed into the silver. Where did you get that necklace? Caleb looked down. His hand closed around the compass. Excuse me. The compass. Madeline's voice was low, but the force beneath it made Sophie move closer to her father. Where did you get it? Caleb studied her face. Something in her expression made him cautious. Maybe this is not the place. It belonged to my husband. Caleb went still. Sophie looked between them. Madeline's gaze never left the compass. My husband wore it the day he died. Caleb's fingers loosened slightly. Sophie spoke before he could. My daddy says it belonged to the man who saved his life. Madeline looked at her, then back at Caleb. My husband has been dead for 8 years. The color drained from Caleb's face. Applause erupted behind them as another speaker walked onto the stage. Caleb reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a worn envelope. I do not know who your husband was, he said, but I have been trying to find this man for almost 9 years. He opened the envelope. The photograph inside was faded at the edges. Madeline saw the mountain road, the crushed vehicle, the rain, a younger Caleb standing beside an ambulance with blood on his shirt, and next to him, smiling through the storm, stood Ethan. Madeline touched the edge of the photograph. Her hand shook. That is impossible. Caleb looked at the man in the picture. No, he said quietly. What happened on that mountain was impossible. Madeline lifted her eyes to his. Come with me. She led Caleb and Sophie away from the ballroom through a narrow corridor and into a private conference room where the music faded behind a closed door. Caleb placed the photograph on the table between them. Caleb reached for the silver compass, but Madeline placed her hand over it first. The movement was quick, almost instinctive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The compass lay between their hands on the polished table, its dark blue face catching the cold light from the ceiling. Caleb could feel the tension in Madeline's fingers. She was not holding the necklace like a woman examining evidence. She was holding it like someone trying to stop a door from closing. Sophie stood beside her father, watching both adults with growing concern. Madeline slowly lifted her hand. Take it off, she said. Caleb looked at her. Please. The word sounded difficult for her. He reached behind his neck and loosened the leather cord. The compass slid into his palm. Even after all these years, he could still feel the weight of that mountain whenever he touched it. Madeline extended her hand. Caleb did not give it to her. Her expression sharpened. "You said it belonged to your husband," he said. "I heard you. Then give it back. I need to understand who I am giving it to." Madeline stared at him as if no one had spoken to her that way in years. "My name is Madeline Vale. I know your name. Ethan Vale was my husband." Caleb glanced toward the faded photograph on the table. The man in the picture was younger than Caleb remembered him. His face was streaked with rain and dirt, but the smile was unmistakable. Caleb had looked at that face hundreds of times. He had imagined the voice attached to it. He had wondered whether the stranger had survived the night, whether he had returned to a wife, whether he had children who waited by a window while the storm swallowed the road. Now the answer stood across from him, wearing a black evening gown and an expression carved from 8 years of grief. Sophie touched Caleb's sleeve. "Dad." He looked down. She looked sad. Madeline turned her face away. Caleb knelt beside Sophie. "Can you wait outside with the nice woman who brought us in?" Sophie shook her head. "I want to stay. This is grown-up talk. You say that when you do not want me to hear something." Caleb glanced toward the door. Nora Parker stood just outside, uncertain whether she was permitted to enter. Madeline opened the door. "Nora, would you stay with Sophie for a few minutes?" Sophie moved closer to Caleb. "I am not leaving you with her if she thinks you stole something." Caleb rested both hands on her shoulders. "I did not steal anything. I know. And I am not going anywhere." Sophie studied his face. "You promise, I promise." She reluctantly followed Nora into the corridor. Before the door closed, she looked back at Madeline. "My dad tells the truth." The door clicked shut. Silence returned. Madeline faced Caleb. "I want the necklace, and I want to know how your husband died." The directness of the question struck her. Her shoulders became rigid. "That is not your concern. He saved my life. My husband died in a rescue operation in the North Cascades. That is not enough. It is all you need to know." Caleb picked up the photograph. "For almost 9 years I've carried this picture. I called police stations. I wrote to rescue groups. My wife spent months trying to identify him. If this is really your husband, then I have a right to know whether he made it home." Madeline's eyes dropped to the engraving on the back of the compass. "Always find your way home." "He did not," she said. The words came out flat. Caleb's fingers tightened around the photograph. Madeline looked toward the rain-covered windows. His body was recovered 2 days after the landslide. He was found below a collapsed section of highway. The official report said he had been assisting a volunteer rescue team. Caleb shook his head. "That cannot be the whole report." "It is." "No." Madeline turned back. "You think you know more than the people who recovered him. I know where this picture was taken." He placed the photograph on the table and pointed toward the damaged guardrail behind them. "That bend was 6 miles west of the main rescue site. Your husband was already there before the county teams arrived." Madeline looked at the image. "You cannot know what time it was taken." Caleb pointed to the faint orange numbers printed along the lower edge. 5:42 in the afternoon. Madeline leaned closer. The official timeline she had been given placed Ethan with the volunteer team after midnight. For 8 years, she had accepted that timeline because accepting it had been easier than reopening the investigation. She looked at Caleb again. "Tell me everything." His gaze stayed on hers. "Everything I remember. Do not leave anything out." Caleb sat down slowly. Madeline remained standing. He turned the compass over in his hand. "When I saw him for the first time, he was running into the storm. 8 years earlier, the North Cascades had disappeared beneath rain. Caleb was driving east after delivering a custom crib to a family in Winthrop. The job had taken longer than expected. He had promised Hannah he would be home before dark. She was 4 months pregnant with Sophie. His truck heater barely worked, and the windshield wipers dragged across the glass with a tired squeal. Water streamed down the mountain in silver sheets. Every few miles, the radio signal dissolved into static. Hannah called just before he entered a stretch without service. "You should pull over," she said. "I am fine. You say that when you are not fine. I learned it from you. I am serious, Caleb. So am I. I will be home before midnight." "You said before 9. I was trying to sound optimistic. Thunder rolled through the mountains. Hannah went quiet. "Please be careful." Caleb smiled even though she could not see him. "I have 2 reasons to be careful now." He could hear the smile in her voice when she answered. 3, if you count me. I always count you twice." The call ended when the signal dropped. Those were the last calm words he heard that night. Several miles later, brake lights appeared through the rain. Caleb slowed. Mud covered half the road. Rocks the size of chairs had fallen from the slope. A line of vehicles had stopped near a narrow bend, but no one seemed to know what had happened beyond it. Then he saw smoke. Caleb pulled onto the shoulder and stepped out. Cold rain struck his face. A woman ran toward him, shouting that 2 vehicles had been hit by falling rocks. One had crashed against the barrier. The other had spun toward the ravine. Caleb grabbed his phone. No signal. He opened the back of his truck and reached for a coil of rope, a heavy pry bar, and the tool bag he used for deliveries. Before he could close the door, a man in a dark rain jacket ran past him. "Emergency crews are coming," Caleb shouted. The stranger did not slow. Caleb followed. Around the bend, an SUV had been crushed against the rock wall. Its rear window was gone. A teenage boy was trapped inside, crying out for his mother. The second vehicle rested at an angle near the ravine. One wheel hung beyond the broken guardrail. The stranger reached the SUV first. He picked up a tire iron from the road and smashed the remaining glass from the rear window. "Can you hear me?" he called. The boy nodded frantically. "Good. Keep looking at me." The stranger removed his jacket and pushed it through the window to protect the boy from the broken glass. Caleb arrived beside him. "I have rope. Anchor it to your truck. The road is moving." "I know. What is your plan?" The man looked toward the second vehicle. "Get them out before it moves again." There was no time to argue. Caleb ran back to the truck and secured the rope around the rear axle. When he returned, the stranger had pulled the teenage boy through the window. A man from one of the stopped cars carried the boy toward safety. The stranger pointed toward the vehicle near the ravine. "A woman and a child are inside." Caleb wrapped the rope around his waist. The stranger grabbed his arm. "If that car goes over, let go. If I let go, you go with it. Then do not let go too late." They moved toward the vehicle. The driver was pinned behind the steering wheel. Blood ran from a cut along her forehead. A little boy sat in the back seat, screaming for his mother. The stranger climbed through the broken rear window. The vehicle shifted beneath his weight. Caleb braced the rope around the remains of the guardrail. "Easy," he shouted. The stranger crawled toward the boy. "Hey, buddy, look at me." The child's crying did not stop. "What is your name?" "Noah." "Okay, Noah. My name is Ethan." The name meant nothing to Caleb then. Ethan reached for the child's seatbelt, but the buckle had jammed. He pulled a knife from his pocket and began cutting through the strap. Noah looked toward the mountain. Another cluster of rocks tumbled across the road. "Is the mountain going to fall?" Ethan looked at the silver compass hanging from his neck. "See this?" Noah nodded. "I want you to watch the needle." "Why?" "Because that needle knows where it is going." The boy stared at the compass. Ethan cut through the final strap. "Today, you follow it." He lifted Noah toward the window. Caleb reached inside and pulled the child against his chest. "Take him back," Ethan said. "What about the mother? I am getting her." The driver stirred. "My daughter," she whispered. Ethan leaned closer. "What did you say?" "My daughter was in the other car." Caleb looked toward the crushed SUV. The teenage boy who had been rescued was shouting that his sister was missing. The road beneath them trembled. Caleb carried Noah toward the waiting vehicles and placed him in the arms of a woman who wrapped him in a coat. When Caleb returned, Ethan was trying to free the driver's legs. The steering column had collapsed across them. Caleb climbed through the passenger side. Together they pushed against the metal. It did not move. "The rope," Ethan said. Caleb fed it through the broken window and looped it around part of the damaged frame. Several strangers joined them. On Caleb's signal, they pulled. Metal screamed. The steering column shifted enough for Ethan to drag the woman free. The vehicle slipped another foot toward the ravine. Caleb felt the rope burn through his gloves. "Move!" he shouted. Ethan pushed the woman through the rear window. Hands reached for her. Then the guardrail gave way. The vehicle dropped. Caleb threw himself backward as the rope snapped tight. Ethan grabbed the window frame and pulled himself out seconds before the vehicle crashed against the rocks below. For one breathless moment, both men lay on the road. Ethan laughed. Not because anything was funny, because they were alive. Caleb stared at him. "You always do this, only on days ending in day. That is a terrible answer. It is the best one I have." Sirens sounded somewhere beyond the rain. Ethan stood and looked toward the crushed SUV. The teenage boy was calling for his missing sister. Caleb grabbed Ethan's sleeve. "Emergency crews are close. She is still out there. You do not know where." Ethan looked toward the slope below the road. She was thrown from the car. The mountain groaned. Both men turned. A line of trees shifted above them. "Move!" Ethan shouted. Caleb saw the wall of mud too late. Ethan struck him from the side. They rolled across the road as rocks slammed into the place where Caleb had been standing. The world became noise, mud, cold water, splintering metal. Caleb's shoulder hit the ground and pain exploded through his arm. Ethan dragged him behind the delivery truck. A rock struck the side panel hard enough to crush the door. Caleb tried to stand. His left arm hung uselessly. Blood ran into his eye. The leather cord around Ethan's neck had snapped during the fall. The compass disappeared beneath the mud near the guardrail. Neither man noticed. Emergency lights flashed through the rain. Rescue workers reached the bend shouting instructions. Caleb tried to move toward the slope. Ethan stopped him. "You are done. There is a girl missing. And your shoulder is out. I can still help." Ethan looked at him. "You have a family?" "My wife is pregnant. First child." "Yes." Ethan smiled. "Then let the medics take you." Caleb looked toward the darkness below the road. "You are going back. There is still someone out there. You have a family." The question made Ethan pause. "Yes." "Then you should leave too." Ethan looked toward the road behind them as if home existed somewhere beyond the storm. "My wife is going to be furious." Caleb almost laughed. "Mine already is." A paramedic reached for Caleb. He resisted. "At least tell me your name." Thunder cracked above them. Ethan answered, but the sound disappeared beneath the storm. Caleb saw only the shape of the word on his lips. Then rescue workers pulled Caleb toward the ambulance. He looked back once. Ethan was running toward the ravine. The silver compass was no longer around his neck. Inside the conference room, Caleb stopped speaking. Rain pressed against the windows. Madeline had sat down without realizing it. Her hands rested motionless in her lap. "He told you he had a wife," she said. "Yes. And he said I would be furious." Caleb nodded. A sound escaped her that might have been a laugh if it had not broken in the middle. "That sounds like Ethan." Caleb looked at the photograph. "I spent years wondering whether he made it back to you." Madeline's eyes remained fixed on the table. He did not. Caleb let the silence stand. After several seconds, Madeline lifted her gaze. "How did you find the necklace?" 3 days later. You went back. My truck was still there. So were most of my tools. Your shoulder was injured. Hannah drove. The memory softened his expression. She spent the entire trip telling me I was an idiot. She sounds sensible. She was. Caleb looked down at the compass. The road crew had cleared most of the mud near the guardrail. I saw something shining near the ditch. The cord was broken, but the compass was almost untouched. He turned it over and traced the engraving with his thumb. I reported it to a sheriff's deputy. He wrote down my name and told me someone would call. No one did. Not at first. Caleb explained that the storm had triggered several emergencies across 2 counties. State patrol officers, county deputies, park rangers, private volunteers, and medical teams had all filed separate reports. The compass had been found outside the main recovery area. There was no name engraved on it, no serial number, no photograph clear enough to identify the owner. A month passed, then another. Hannah began making calls. She contacted local newspapers and rescue organizations. She mailed copies of the photograph to agencies that never answered. A small newspaper printed a notice about the unidentified volunteer, but the article used Caleb's description and no photograph. Nothing came from it. "Why did you keep wearing it?" Madeline asked. "I did not at first." Caleb described the wooden box, the letters, and the leather cord Hannah had bought. After Hannah became ill, the search slowed. Hospital visits replaced phone calls. Medical forms covered the kitchen table where the unanswered letters once sat. When she died, Caleb found the compass inside the wooden box with a note written in her hand. "Do not stop believing people can find their way back." Caleb wore it the next morning. He had worn it almost every day since. Madeline looked toward the closed door where Sophie waited. "Your daughter believes it saved you. It reminded me that someone chose to save me. That is not the same thing." Some days it was. Madeline reached for the photograph. Who took this, one of the rescued families? The woman from the vehicle, I believe so. The picture was mailed to the Community Emergency Center months later. They forwarded it to me because my truck was visible in the background. Did the family include a name? Caleb turned the photograph over. A short message had faded across the back. "To the 2 strangers who brought us home." Beneath the message was a surname. Bennett. Madeline stared at it. The boy in the car was Noah Bennett. Yes. Her eyes lifted sharply. How old would he be now? 22, maybe 23. Madeline stood so quickly the chair moved behind her. Caleb watched recognition pass across her face. "What is it?" Madeline opened the conference room door. Nora and Sophie were seated on a bench outside. Sophie held a glass of water in both hands. Madeline said, "Pull the employee directory." Nora stood. "What name? Noah Bennett." She searched on her tablet. After several seconds, she turned the screen toward Madeline. A company identification photograph appeared beside the name. Noah Bennett, Junior Systems Engineer, Seattle office. Madeline looked from the screen to the faded photograph in her hand. The frightened little boy Ethan had pulled from a broken vehicle had been walking through her company's doors for almost a year. She pressed one finger against the call button on the wall. "Ask him to come upstairs." Noah Bennett arrived on the 42nd floor 12 minutes later. He stepped from the elevator wearing a navy sweater over a wrinkled white shirt, his company badge clipped to his belt. He looked young enough to still be mistaken for an intern, though the nervous way he adjusted his sleeves suggested he already understood that being summoned to Madeline Vale's private conference room was rarely good news. Nora opened the door for him. Noah entered, saw Madeline, and stopped. "Ms. Vale." Then he noticed Caleb. His eyes moved to the faded photograph on the table. The color left his face. "Where did you get that?" Madeline watched him carefully. "You recognize it." Noah approached the table as if the photograph might disappear if he moved too quickly. "My mother has the original." Caleb stood. You are Noah." Noah looked at him. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Noah's gaze dropped to Caleb's left shoulder. "You were the man with the rope." Caleb felt the mountain return in fragments, rain against glass, a child screaming, a rope burning through his gloves. "You remember me?" "Not clearly." Noah swallowed. "Mostly pieces. Your voice. The truck. The other man telling me to watch the compass." His eyes found the necklace in Caleb's hand. That compass. Madeline gripped the back of a chair. "What do you remember about Ethan?" Noah looked at her confused. "Ethan. The man who pulled you from the vehicle." Noah's expression changed. He had heard the name before, perhaps in company biographies or newspaper articles, but he had never attached it to the face from the mountain. "That was your husband?" "Yes." Noah lowered himself into a chair. "I did not know." Madeline sat opposite him. "I need you to tell me everything you remember." Noah stared at the photograph. "I was 14. The doctors said shock erased parts of it. I remember my mother trapped in the front seat. I remember the car moving. I thought we were going over the edge." He pressed his palms together. The man climbed through the back window. He had blood on his face, but I do not think it was his. I kept looking at the rocks above us. He held up the compass and told me to watch the needle. Caleb nodded. "You asked if he was a firefighter." Noah looked at him. "He said he was one that day." "Yes?" Noah breathed out slowly. "I thought I invented that part." Madeline's voice softened. "What happened after he pulled you out?" "I remember a woman carrying me away. I remember asking about my mother. Then someone said my sister was missing. Grace Caleb said." Noah nodded. "She was in the other vehicle with my cousin. The crash threw her through a window. No one knew where she landed." Madeline looked at the rescue photograph again. "Did Ethan go looking for her?" "My mother says he did." The room became still. Madeline leaned forward. "Your mother spoke to him. She remembers more than I do. She kept records from the accident. Reports, photographs, letters from the hospital. Everything." "Where does she live?" "Near Bellingham." Madeline glanced toward the windows. The rain had grown heavier, blurring the city below. "Call her." Noah hesitated. "She does not like talking about that night. Neither do I." Something in Madeline's face ended his hesitation. He took out his phone and walked toward the far side of the room. Caleb opened the conference room door. Sophie sat beside Nora, drawing on the back of a printed agenda. When she saw him, she hurried over. "Are you in trouble?" "No." "Is she—" Caleb looked toward Madeline. "I think she has been for a long time." Sophie followed his gaze. Madeline stood alone near the table, one hand pressed against her mouth while Noah spoke quietly into his phone. Sophie lowered her voice. "Did you find the man?" "Yes." "Is he alive?" Caleb crouched in front of her. "No bug." Her eyes filled with sadness. "Was he the one in the picture?" "Yes." The lady's husband, Caleb, nodded. Sophie looked at Madeline again. "Then she needs somebody." Nora glanced away, pretending not to hear. Noah returned several minutes later. "My mother will meet with you tomorrow morning." Madeline picked up the photograph. "We will go tonight." Noah blinked. "The roads are bad. I have driven in rain before." Caleb looked at her. "You have been driven in rain before." Madeline turned toward him. "Is there a difference in the Cascades?" "Yes. I am not asking you to come." "No, but you are holding a photograph from my life and planning to question a woman about a rescue I was part of." Madeline studied him. Caleb could see the answer she wanted to give. Then she looked at Sophie. We leave in 30 minutes. Caleb shook his head. My truck is downstairs. Madeline's expression suggested she had never willingly entered a vehicle older than some of her employees. Your truck Sophie's seat is already installed. Nora cleared her throat. Madeline's car has safety seats available. Sophie looked at Madeline. Does your car smell like wood? No. Then Dad's is better. Caleb hid a smile. Madeline did not. The drive north began in silence. Rain swept across Interstate 5 while Caleb's wipers struggled to keep pace. Sophie sat in the back with a blanket over her knees eating crackers from a paper bag. Madeline sat in the passenger seat holding the photograph inside a protective folder Nora had provided. She had changed out of her evening gown and borrowed a coat from Nora. Even dressed simply, she seemed out of place inside the aging truck. She pulled at the seatbelt. It refused to move. You have to ask nicely, Sophie said from the back. Madeline looked over her shoulder. Excuse me. It sticks when people get mad. I am not mad at the seatbelt. The belt locked again. Sophie nodded knowingly. Madeline faced forward. Please. The belt released. Sophie smiled. See, Caleb coughed to cover a laugh. Madeline clicked the belt into place. You designed the vehicle this way? Yes. It teaches patience. For the first time since the ballroom, the tension eased. Only slightly. After Sophie fell asleep, the truck became quiet again. Madeline kept her eyes on the road. Why did you stop looking for Ethan? Caleb held the steering wheel with both hands. I did not stop all at once. That is not an answer. Hannah got sick. Madeline looked at him. Caleb watched the red lights ahead. At first we thought it was something minor. Then there were tests, more tests, hospital visits. Every week became another appointment. His voice remained steady, but his grip tightened around the wheel. The letters about the compass stayed in a folder. We kept saying we would send more when things settled down. They never did. No. Madeline lowered her gaze. I am sorry. Caleb nodded once. After several miles, she spoke again. Did Hannah know why you wore it? She knew before anyone. What did she think it meant that I was alive because a stranger decided my life mattered? Madeline looked out at the darkness. That sounds like Ethan. Caleb glanced toward her. You say his name like it hurts. It does. You also say it like you are afraid it will stop hurting. Her head turned sharply. Caleb kept his attention on the road. I should not have said that. No, Madeline replied. You should not have. But she did not deny it. Laura Bennett lived in a white farmhouse surrounded by wet fields and cedar trees. A porch light glowed through the rain when Caleb's truck pulled into the gravel drive. Noah had arrived ahead of them. He opened the front door before they reached the porch. A woman in her late 50s stood behind him. Her silver hair was tied loosely at the back of her neck. She looked at Caleb and covered her mouth. The man with the rope. Caleb stopped. Laura crossed the porch and embraced him before he could speak. You brought my son out. Caleb's arms remained at his sides for one startled second. Then he hugged her back. You got him out, he said. We both did. Laura pulled away and looked at Madeline. Her eyes filled immediately. You are Ethan's wife. Madeline stood motionless beneath the porch light. You knew his name? Not that night. Laura reached for her hand. I learned it later. Inside, the house smelled of tea and cedar smoke. Sophie sat beside Noah at the kitchen table, drawing while the adults gathered in the living room. Laura brought out a large cardboard box. It contained newspaper clippings, hospital wristbands, photographs, and copies of emergency reports. Every item had been arranged inside labeled envelopes. I kept everything she said. For years, I thought if I put enough pieces together, the night would make sense. She handed Madeline a photograph of Grace in a hospital bed. Grace was 16 in the picture. Her face was bruised. One leg was suspended in traction, but she was smiling. She survived, Madeline said. Because of Ethan. Laura sat across from her. After he helped Caleb free me, my son told him Grace was missing. Most people had moved back because the mountain was still unstable. Ethan went after her. Yes. Laura opened another envelope. Inside was a handwritten incident log. The paramedic who treated Grace was named Ruth Callahan. She wrote this before the reports were divided between agencies. Madeline read the first page. At 6:14 in the evening, an unidentified male volunteer entered the lower slope, searching for a missing teenage girl. At 6:27, the volunteer located Grace Bennett near a fallen cedar. At 6:31, a second landslide began. Madeline's eyes moved faster. The volunteer carried Grace uphill toward two rescue workers. He passed the girl to them before the ground collapsed beneath him. Madeline stopped reading. Her vision blurred. Caleb sat beside her close enough to help but not touching her. He gave them, Grace Laura said. Then part of the slope broke away. Madeline forced herself to look down again. The final line was written in darker ink. Volunteer identified as Ethan Vale. Recovery delayed due to continued slide activity. He was not alone, Madeline whispered. Laura shook her head. No. The official report made it sound as though he'd disappeared somewhere below the highway. He was with rescuers when the ground gave way. They called to him. Ruth said he was conscious for several moments. Madeline's hand trembled against the page. Did he say anything? Laura hesitated. Ruth wrote that he asked whether Grace was safe. Madeline closed her eyes. He did not ask about me. The words escaped before she could stop them. Laura leaned forward. He may not have had time. Madeline nodded, but the old wound had already opened. Caleb looked at the report. Is Ruth alive? Yes. She lives in Everett now. Laura reached into the box and removed a sealed envelope. She wrote this after she learned who Ethan was. I tried to send it to you years ago, but it came back. Your company had moved offices. Madeline accepted the envelope. Her name was written across the front. The paper had yellowed. She opened it carefully. Ruth's letter described Ethan's final minutes. He had remained conscious long enough to hear that Grace was alive. He had asked one rescuer to tell his wife he was sorry he would not be home the next morning. Madeline read the sentence again, then again. The room disappeared around her. Ethan had remembered his promise. He had remembered her. Madeline stood and walked toward the back door. Outside, rain fell over the dark fields. She stepped beneath the porch roof and pressed Ruth's letter against her chest. Caleb followed after a moment. He stopped several feet away. Madeline stared into the rain. The last thing I told him was that I was tired of losing him to strangers. Caleb said nothing. I made him feel guilty for being the person I loved. You were angry. That does not make it harmless. No. She turned toward him. You are not supposed to agree with me. I do not think you need another person lying to make you feel better. Her eyes flashed, but the anger faded quickly. My final memory of him has always been his back as he walked away. Caleb leaned against the porch railing. My final memory of Hannah is a hospital hallway. Madeline looked at him. I was arguing about an insurance form. She was asleep when I left the room. By the time I came back, she was gone. I am sorry. For 3 years, I believed my last choice should have been different. What changed? Nothing. Caleb watched the rain strike the porch steps. I just stopped believing one terrible moment had the right to erase every good one. Madeline looked down at Ruth's letter. Caleb continued. You loved Ethan before that morning. He knew it before he walked out the door. One argument does not get to rewrite a marriage. A tear slipped down Madeline's cheek. She wiped it away quickly. Caleb pretended not to notice. Inside, Sophie laughed at something Noah had drawn. The sound traveled through the screen door. Madeline's shoulders lowered. "When did you stop feeling guilty about Hannah? I did not." Caleb turned toward the window where Sophie sat beneath the kitchen light. "I just learned guilt can sit beside gratitude. It does not have to drive." Madeline looked at him for a long moment. "You talk like a man who has spent too much time repairing old furniture." "That is possible." The following morning, Laura took them to the small county archive where the remaining rescue documents were stored. The official records confirmed the timeline. Ethan had reached the first crash before the registered volunteer team. His early actions had been recorded under the Bennett family rescue, while his death had been filed separately under the second landslide. No one had connected the two reports. Madeline photographed every page. Caleb stood beside her while she read Ethan's name in places it had never appeared before. At noon, they returned to Laura's farmhouse. Caleb removed the compass. He placed it in Madeline's open palm. "It should have gone back to you years ago." Madeline closed her fingers around the silver. The weight felt familiar. For one brief moment, she was back in their first apartment, fastening it around Ethan's neck while he complained that the engraving was too sentimental. She wanted to keep it. She wanted to lock it inside the drawer beside his ring where nothing else could touch it. Then she looked at Caleb. He had carried the compass through Hannah's illness, through funeral mornings, unpaid bills, and nights when Sophie cried for a mother who would not return. Ethan had saved his life. Hannah had kept the search alive. Madeline opened her hand again. "You carried this because Ethan brought you home. You gave it to him." Neither moved. Sophie stepped between them. She looked at the compass resting in Madeline's palm. "Maybe it does not have to belong to one person." Caleb glanced down. "What do you mean?" Sophie pointed to the words engraved on the back. "It says, 'Find your way home.'" "Yes, maybe it is still doing that." Madeline's eyes met Caleb's. She closed the compass inside his hand. "Keep it for now." Caleb hesitated. "Are you sure no?" It was the most honest answer she had given him. 2 days later, Madeline invited Caleb and Sophie to Ethan's memorial garden near Lake Washington. The rain had finally stopped. White clouds moved across a pale blue sky. Cedar branches stirred above a stone path lined with lilies. At the center of the garden stood a bench engraved with Ethan's name. Beneath it were the words he had once written inside a volunteer handbook. "A compass can show direction. Only compassion can show the way." Sophie read the sentence aloud. He really liked compasses. Madeline smiled faintly. He was terrible with directions. Caleb looked at her. "Seriously?" He once drove 2 hours toward Portland while trying to reach Vancouver. Sophie laughed. Caleb did too. The sound surprised Madeline. For years, Ethan's name had entered conversations like something fragile. Now he existed in the sunlight again. Madeline told Sophie about the winter Ethan secretly repaired broken heaters at a shelter. Caleb described the way Ethan had spoken to Noah inside the vehicle calm, even while the road was collapsing beneath them. Each story filled a space the other had never known was empty. When Sophie ran ahead to collect fallen leaves, Madeline and Caleb remained beside the bench. "You restore things people think are beyond saving," Madeline said. "Sometimes. Do you ever decide something is too damaged?" "Yes." Madeline looked at the lilies moving in the breeze. "What do you do then?" Caleb placed one hand against the back of Ethan's bench. "I stop trying to make it what it was, and after that I find out what it can become." Madeline turned toward him. For a quiet moment, neither grief nor wealth stood between them. Only two people who had survived lives they had never chosen. Sophie called from the path. Caleb looked away first. Madeline followed him toward the garden gate. the old rescue photograph held carefully against her heart. 3 mornings after the visit to Ethan's memorial garden, Madeline stood outside Reed Restoration, holding the faded rescue photograph inside a new protective frame. She had told herself she was only returning it. The excuse had sounded reasonable in her office. It sounded less convincing beneath the weathered wooden sign above Caleb's workshop. Through the front window, she could see him bent over a church pew. Morning light fell across his shoulders while fine dust drifted through the air. Sophie sat nearby, painting a small wooden bird with intense concentration. Madeline lifted her hand to knock. Before she touched the glass, Sophie looked up and waved. Caleb followed her gaze. For 1 second, surprise crossed his face. Then he opened the door. "You found the place? Your address was on the invitation?" I was beginning to think billionaires did not travel south of Seattle, only under exceptional circumstances. Caleb looked at the frame in her hands. "And this is exceptional." Madeline held it out. The original was deteriorating. I had it cleaned and preserved. He studied the restored photograph through the glass. Rain still blurred part of the mountain road, but Ethan's face was clearer now. So was Caleb's. "You did not have to do that." "I know." Sophie appeared beside them with blue paint on her fingers. "Is that the mountain picture?" Madeline lowered it so she could see. "It is." Sophie pointed to Ethan. "He looks happy. He usually did when he was doing something dangerous." Caleb glanced at her. "You make that sound normal." With Ethan it was. Sophie pointed toward the younger version of her father. "Dad looks scared." "I was not scared," Caleb said. "You had blood on your shirt. That does not prove anything. It proves you should have been scared." Madeline smiled. Caleb noticed. The smile disappeared almost immediately, but not before he saw how different it made her look. Softer, younger, less like the woman whose face appeared on the cover of business magazines. Caleb stepped aside. "Do you want coffee?" Madeline looked into the workshop. "I should probably get back to the office." Sophie took her hand. "Dad's coffee is bad, but we have cookies." Madeline looked down at the small fingers wrapped around hers. Cookies sound safer. The workshop was warmer than she expected. Shelves covered every wall. Some held polished tables and repaired clocks. Others held broken chairs, cracked cabinets, and boxes filled with brass handles. A row of wooden toys stood near the front window. Madeline removed her coat and placed it over a chair. A cloud of sawdust rose from the seat. She picked up the coat again. Caleb handed her a cloth. "You may want to avoid touching anything. Is that your professional advice? It is my advice to someone wearing a dress that probably costs more than my truck." Madeline brushed at the fabric. The sawdust spread. Caleb watched her make it worse. "Stop. I am capable of cleaning my own clothes. You are grinding it into the material. I run a technology company. Technology rarely involves walnut dust. Then technology may be missing something." Caleb took the cloth from her and gently brushed the front of her dress. His hand paused near her waist. Madeline became very still. He stepped back. "There. Thank you. You are welcome." Sophie watched them from the workbench. Neither adult looked at her. Madeline placed the framed photograph beside Hannah's picture near the office door. The 2 images stood together. Ethan in the storm, Hannah beneath the summer sky. Caleb saw Madeline looking at both. "She helped me write most of the letters," he said. "I know." "Laura showed you the photograph of her at the kitchen table. She looked determined. She was usually determined when I wanted to quit." Madeline moved toward the church pew. One end had been badly damaged by water. Dark stains marked the wood and a carved panel had split near the base. "Can this be repaired?" "Yes, it looks ruined." Caleb ran his fingers over the damaged panel. "The surface is ugly. The structure is still strong. How long will it take? 3 weeks if nothing else breaks?" And if something else breaks, it usually does. Madeline studied the shelves. Do people bring you pieces because they are valuable? Sometimes. What about the rest? Some things are valuable because someone remembers where they sat. He nodded toward a small kitchen chair near the wall. That belonged to a woman whose husband died last year. He built it for their son. It is not worth much money, but she cried when the back broke. Can you fix it? I already did. Madeline noticed the smooth repair along the joint. The new wood was visible if someone looked closely. You did not hide the break. No. Why? Because hiding damage usually means removing more of the original piece. Madeline traced the repaired line without touching it. So you leave the scar. I make sure it can carry weight again. The words settled between them. Sophie placed her painted bird on the table. Mine has scars too. Blue paint covered one wing more thickly than the other. Caleb examined it. That is not a scar. That is too much paint. It looks artistic. It looks wet. Madeline picked up a thin brush. May I? Sophie nodded. Madeline carefully spread the paint across the wing. Caleb leaned against the table and watched her. You have done that before. My mother painted. Did she teach you? She tried. What happened? I learned to build companies instead. Sophie looked at the bird. You can do both. Madeline met Caleb's eyes. He said nothing, but his expression agreed. Later, while Sophie worked on homework in the office, Madeline walked through the rear section of the workshop. The roof leaked into a metal bucket. An old dust collection machine rattled near the wall. Caleb switched it off with his foot. You should replace that. I should replace several things. How much? He looked at her. No, I asked a question. And I know where it is going. You do not know anything. You are about to offer money. I was about to ask what the machine costs. That is how offering money begins. Madeline crossed her arms. You are remarkably suspicious of help for a man who gave a speech about accepting kindness. Kindness is different from being rescued. Is it? Yes. How kindness does not make one person smaller. Madeline's expression tightened. I have never treated you as small. No, but you are used to entering a room and solving problems before anyone else gets to name them. She glanced toward the leaking roof. The problem appears to be water. The water is not the only problem. What is? Caleb hesitated. He looked through the glass office wall at Sophie. Parents from the community center come here sometimes. Widows, widowers. People trying to return to work after years of caring for someone. Madeline waited. Most training programs require fixed schedules. They cannot manage that with children. Some cannot afford transportation. Some have been out of work so long that no one will interview them. And you teach them when I can. How many for right now? Without charging them. They help in the shop. Madeline looked around again. The leaking roof, the failing machine, the shelves crowded with unfinished work. You cannot keep doing that alone. I know. What do they need? Caleb gave a tired laugh. They need time, childcare tools, transportation, paid training, and employers willing to see something other than a gap in their work history. Madeline absorbed the answer. What if we built it? He stared at her. A program. With your company. With anyone willing to do the work properly. Caleb shook his head. I do not need you to rescue me. I was not offering to. It sounded like a check. It was an idea. From someone who has never had to choose between replacing a machine and paying for a school trip. Madeline went silent. The words hung in the workshop. Caleb regretted them immediately, but he did not take them back. Madeline looked toward Sophie's desk. You are right. He had expected anger. Her calm made him more uncomfortable. She faced him again. So, tell me what the idea should be. That question changed everything. Over the next month, Madeline returned to Reed Restoration 6 times. The first visit lasted an hour. The second lasted 3. By the fourth, Sophie had begun leaving a clean coffee mug beside the workbench with Madeline's name written on masking tape. Caleb and Madeline met with parents from the community center, local employers, child care providers, and trade instructors. Madeline listened more than she spoke. When she forgot, Caleb reminded her. The program took shape on sheets of paper taped to the workshop wall: flexible classes, paid apprenticeships, child care during training, transportation support, business instruction for parents who wanted to work independently. Caleb insisted that participants be paid for work completed during training. They are not charity cases, he said during one meeting. They are workers learning a trade. Madeline added the sentence to the program charter. They called it the Compass Project. Sophie designed the first logo. It showed a wooden compass surrounded by 5 uneven stars. Madeline asked why there were 5. Sophie pointed to each one. Dad, Mom, me, Ethan, and you. The room became quiet. Caleb looked at Madeline. She lowered her eyes to the drawing. It is a strong design, she said. Sophie smiled. Most evenings ended with Caleb making dinner in the apartment above the workshop. Madeline declined the first invitation. Sophie ignored her answer and set another plate anyway. By the third dinner, Madeline knew where the forks were kept. By the 5th, she brought dessert. Caleb learned that she disliked mushrooms, but ate them when Sophie cooked because she did not want to hurt her feelings. Madeline learned that Caleb sang badly while washing dishes and stopped whenever he realized she was listening. One evening, she found him sitting alone beside the framed rescue photograph. Sophie had fallen asleep upstairs. You still look at it, Madeline said. Sometimes. Do you see Ethan or the mountain? Caleb considered the question. Both. Madeline sat beside him. I used to avoid photographs because they felt like doors I could not open. What changed? She looked toward the office where Hannah's picture hung. I met someone who kept his doors open. Caleb turned toward her. She held his gaze for 1 second too long. Then the lights went out. The dust machine groaned to a stop. Rain struck the roof. Power line, Caleb said. He found candles in the office and placed them around the workshop. Golden light moved across the tools and unfinished furniture. Madeline sat at the workbench carving the edge of a wooden compass. Caleb stood behind her. You are pressing too hard. You have said that 4 times. You are still pressing too hard. He reached around her and covered her hand with his. Let the blade follow the grain. His chest was close to her shoulder. Madeline could feel the warmth of his breath near her hair. Together they guided the carving tool around the curve. The room seemed to narrow around them. Caleb's hand remained over hers after the blade stopped moving. Madeline pulled away. Too quickly. The tool struck the table. I am sorry, he said. No. She stared at the unfinished compass. I just have not done this in a long time. Carved wood. She looked at him. Caleb nodded. I know. Madeline's voice became quieter. I do not want to forget him. I am not asking you to. That is what scares me. What? That I might not have to. Caleb stepped closer. The candlelight caught the silver compass beneath his shirt. Madeline looked at his mouth. He looked at hers. Sophie appeared in the doorway holding a flashlight. Are we having an emergency? Caleb moved back. Apparently. 2 days later, a photographer captured Madeline leaving the workshop. The image appeared online before breakfast. By noon, the headline had spread across several entertainment sites. Billionaire widow's new romance began with her dead husband's necklace. Reporters gathered outside Reed Restoration. Another group waited near Sophie's school. Caleb arrived at dismissal and found 2 cameras pointed toward the entrance. He stepped between them and his daughter. Do not photograph her, one reporter called after him. Did you use Ethan Vale's necklace to get close to Madeline? Caleb stopped. Sophie's hand tightened around his. He turned slowly. Stay away from my daughter. At Vale Horizon, Charles Whitmore placed the article on the conference table. The board needs to discuss your judgment. Madeline looked around the room. My personal life is not on the agenda. The Compass Project is. It has independent oversight. It also has a director who appeared at your charity event wearing Ethan's property. Madeline's voice cooled. Choose your next words carefully. Charles leaned back. He gains access to you. Weeks later, you are funding his program. You are describing events. You are not presenting evidence. I am protecting the company. No, you are using my husband's death to embarrass a man who helped save lives. Charles looked toward the other directors. The public will not see the distinction. Madeline closed the folder in front of her. Then we will make it clear. Caleb did not wait for her plan. That evening, Madeline found him inside the workshop, removing the Compass Project papers from the wall. What are you doing? I am finished. You cannot be serious. There were cameras outside Sophie's school. I am handling that. That is the problem. Madeline stopped. You think everything can be handled because doors close when you walk into a building. I did not invite those reporters. But you live in a world where people expect them. Sophie and I do not. I can provide security. Caleb laughed without humor. You hear danger and answer with money. What would you like me to answer with understanding? I am trying to protect you. I did not ask you to. You did not have to. That does not give you the right to decide what my daughter can endure. Madeline's face tightened. And walking away from a program 12 families are depending on protects her. I will teach them here. With what equipment? Beneath a leaking roof. The words struck harder than she intended. Caleb turned away. Madeline immediately regretted them. I should not have said that. No, you should have. It reminds me how you see this place. That is not how I see it. It is the first place you came when you wanted to fix something. She looked at him. Maybe I came because I did not know where else to go. Caleb's anger faltered, but fear remained. I cannot let Sophie become part of someone else's story. Madeline's voice broke slightly. And I cannot keep losing people because fear tells them leaving is safer. Neither moved. Then Caleb removed the silver compass and placed it inside the wooden box. Madeline watched him close the lid. He did not ask her to stay. She left alone. The workshop door closed behind her. For 3 days, Caleb ignored her calls. On the 4th, Sophie arrived at Vale Horizon with Caleb's sister. She placed an unfinished wooden compass on Madeline's desk. Dad says the project is over. Madeline touched the rough edge. What do you say I think grown-ups stop things when they get scared? Your father has reasons. So do you. Madeline looked at her. Sophie pushed the compass closer. It still needs to be finished. The next morning, Madeline entered the boardroom carrying the Compass Project files. Charles Whitmore proposed canceling all company involvement. Madeline listened until he finished. Then she presented the signed agreements with community centers, employers, instructors, and childcare providers. She showed the board the training schedules, apprentice wages, and independent financial controls. This is not a private favor, she said. It is a program designed by people who understand the problem because they have lived it. Charles folded his hands. And Caleb Reed. He taught me that funding does not equal understanding. Madeline looked around the table. He did not ask for access to my wealth. He asked me to stop believing wealth gave me every answer. She moved the project into a separate charitable trust funded by her personal estate. With permission from the Bennett family and Ruth Callahan, she released the verified rescue records. The public story changed. Caleb was no longer described as a stranger wearing a dead man's necklace. He was identified as one of the people who had risked his life beside Ethan Vale. That evening, Madeline returned to Reed Restoration. Caleb opened the door but remained in the entrance. "I should have understood what attention would cost you," she said. "I should have answered your calls. I am not here to ask you to come back for me." His expression shifted. "I am asking you to come back for the parents who were ready to begin." "And us?" Madeline looked past him at the unfinished wooden compasses. "I do not know what we are." Caleb stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "Neither do I." Rain touched Madeline's hair. Caleb lifted his hand and brushed a drop from her cheek. She did not pull away. "I am still afraid," she said. "So am I. That is not reassuring. It is honest." He leaned closer slowly enough for her to stop him. She did not. Their first kiss was gentle and uncertain. It did not erase Ethan. It did not erase Hannah. It simply belonged to the two people standing beneath the workshop light, choosing not to walk away. The kiss beneath the workshop light did not solve anything. It did not repair the roof silence, the reporters, or erase the fear that still lived between Madeline and Caleb. But when they stepped apart, neither of them reached for the door. Rain continued falling along the narrow street. Water gathered at the edge of the sidewalk and reflected the pale glow from the workshop windows. Caleb looked at Madeline as though he were trying to understand what had just changed. She touched her fingers to her lips. For 8 years, affection had belonged to memory. Every tender thought had led backward to Ethan. Every imagined future had felt like an act of disloyalty. Now Caleb stood in front of her close enough that she could see the faint scar near his chin and the worry he had not learned to hide. "I do not know how to do this," she said. Caleb's voice was quiet. "Neither do I. That is becoming your answer to everything. It has been an accurate answer lately." Madeline almost smiled. Then the workshop door opened behind him. Sophie stood in the doorway wearing pajamas beneath Caleb's sister's oversized coat. Her hair was tangled from sleep. She looked at Madeline, then at Caleb, then back at Madeline. "Did you finish the compass?" Madeline glanced toward the unfinished wooden compass Sophie had left on her desk. "Not yet." Sophie nodded seriously. "You should come inside. It is raining." Caleb stepped aside. Madeline followed them into the workshop. The room felt different from the moment she had left it days earlier. The papers Caleb had removed from the wall remained stacked on a table. The wooden box containing Ethan's compass rested near the office. Nothing had been restored. Nothing had been destroyed either. Caleb carried Sophie upstairs and tucked her into bed while Madeline waited below. She moved through the dim workshop, touching nothing. On the far wall beside the plans for the compass project, someone had taped Sophie's original drawing. 5 uneven stars surrounded a wooden compass. Madeline studied it until Caleb returned. "She will ask questions in the morning," he said. "She already asks questions. She will ask different ones." Madeline looked toward the ceiling. "What will you tell her?" "The truth." "And what is the truth?" Caleb stood beside her. "That we care about each other." Madeline's eyes remained on Sophie's drawing. "Is that enough for tonight?" The answer should have frustrated her. Instead, it brought relief. Madeline was accustomed to decisions that required contracts, projections, and final approval. Caleb seemed willing to let some things exist before naming what they would become. She was still learning how to do that. He picked up the stack of program plans from the table. "You said the project can continue without the company." "Yes." "And the agreements still valid. The instructors still waiting." Caleb looked through the first folder. 12 families were accepted. 14. He raised his eyes. 14. 2 additional applicants were approved this morning. You approved them without me. The review committee approved them. You created a review committee. You stopped answering your phone. That is fair. Madeline reached for another folder. The child care center agreed to extend its hours. 3 local employers signed apprenticeship commitments. The city offered access to a vacant warehouse near the waterfront for 1 year. Caleb stared at her. When did you sleep? I slept. How long? That is not relevant. It is if we are building something together. The word together remained between them. Madeline closed the folder. 4 hours. Caleb shook his head. That is not sleep. That is a long nap. I have operated on less. You should not be proud of that. I am not proud. I am efficient. You are exhausted. I am standing. Barely. She looked at him. You are very comfortable criticizing a woman who just protected your project from an entire board of directors. Our project. Madeline became still. Caleb placed the folders back on the table. Our project, he repeated. The correction carried more weight than he seemed to realize. Madeline lowered her gaze. All right. The following Monday, the first Compass project orientation took place inside the old waterfront warehouse. The building had once stored marine equipment. Its brick walls were stained by decades of salt air, and several windows had been covered with plywood. Nothing matched the polished renderings Madeline's design team had prepared. Caleb preferred it immediately. It has good bones, he said. Madeline stood beside him in the center of the empty floor. It has no heat. That can be fixed. The electrical system is older than my company. That can be fixed too. There is mold in the west office. Caleb looked toward the dark doorway. That may be more difficult. Madeline turned to him. Are you enjoying this a little? She looked around at the cracked concrete and exposed pipes. I could secure a newer building and teach people they need perfect conditions before they begin. That is not what I said. It is what the building would say. Madeline folded her arms. You believe buildings talk too? Only old ones. They seem to tell you exactly what you want to hear. That is why I like them. 14 parents arrived that afternoon. Some came alone. Others brought children who stayed close to their sides. A few stood near the entrance as though waiting for someone to tell them they did not belong. Caleb recognized the expression. He had worn it at the gala. A woman named Elena Morales entered holding the hand of her 5-year-old son, Mateo. She had lost her husband in a construction accident 18 months earlier. Before his death, she had managed their home and helped with invoices for his small contracting business. She had not held a formal job in 11 years. A man named Raymond Carter arrived with twin daughters and a folder filled with rejection letters. His wife had died after a stroke. He had left his position as an electrician to care for her and had been unable to find stable work since. Near the back stood Priya Shah, whose husband had died from cancer. She had once worked in software support but had spent 6 years outside the industry. Madeline greeted each participant personally. She did not mention their losses unless they did. Caleb watched her adjust. In meetings at Vale Horizon, Madeline commanded attention before speaking. Here, she waited for people to finish. She asked what they needed and wrote down the answers. Transportation came up 3 times. Childcare came up 6. Fear came up without anyone naming it. After the introductions, Caleb stood in front of the group. He wore his work clothes. Sawdust clung to one sleeve. Some of you have been told your experience is outdated, he said. Some of you have been told the years you spent caring for someone created a gap in your life. The room remained quiet. It was not a gap. You were working. You were managing medication schedules, children bills, emergencies, grief, and every ordinary thing that refused to stop happening. Elena looked down at her hands. Caleb continued, We are not here to pretend starting again is easy. We are here because starting again should not have to happen alone. Madeline stood near the wall. She watched the participants look toward Caleb. Not with pity, with recognition. The first weeks were disorderly. The warehouse heating failed on the coldest morning of the month. 2 instructors canceled. A delivery of tools arrived at the wrong address. The child care room flooded after a pipe burst during class. Madeline responded to every setback with schedules calls and replacement plans. Caleb responded with coffee extension cords and the belief that work could continue around almost anything. Their differences created arguments. They also created progress. One afternoon, Madeline arrived to find a section of the warehouse covered in plastic sheets. Caleb and several participants were sanding donated furniture for the training room. "You did not submit a ventilation request," she said. Caleb looked up from behind a protective mask. "We opened the windows. It is 38 degrees. Then the dust will be cold." Madeline stared at him. Elena covered a laugh with a cough. Caleb removed the mask. "We needed tables. I ordered tables. For next month. They meet safety requirements. These are tables. They are damaged. That is why we are restoring them." Madeline looked around. Raymond was repairing a loose leg. Priya was cleaning brass handles. Mateo sat in the childcare area drawing pictures of everyone. The work had drawn the group together in a way orientation meetings had not. Madeline took off her coat. Caleb handed her a mask. "You are pressing too hard," he said 30 minutes later. She looked at the sandpaper in her hand. "You say that every time I work with wood. You do it every time." "I am improving. You removed part of the table. It was unnecessary." Caleb smiled. Across the room, Sophie watched them. Since the kiss, neither Caleb nor Madeline had tried to explain the relationship in formal terms. Sophie did not appear to require one. She simply began including Madeline. She saved her a chair at dinner. She asked whether Madeline would attend her school science fair. She started keeping a spare toothbrush in the apartment bathroom because, as she explained, adults always forgot important things. Madeline found it one morning beside Caleb's. The sight frightened her more than the kiss had. It suggested routine. Routine suggested permanence. Permanence suggested loss. She stood in the bathroom doorway until Caleb appeared behind her. "You look like the toothbrush insulted you. It was not there yesterday. Sophie put it there. Why? You would have to ask her." Madeline turned toward him. "Does this not feel fast to you?" Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "It feels slow to me. I met you less than 3 months ago. You have attended 6 dinners, 3 school events, 4 project meetings that became arguments, and 1 terrible movie Sophie chose because the dog on the poster looked friendly. The dog died." "I know. You told me it was a comedy." I had not seen it. Madeline looked again at the toothbrush. "I am serious." "So am I." Caleb's voice softened. "We do not have to pretend this is simple, but we also do not have to be afraid every time something feels good. That sounds easy when you say it. It is not." He glanced toward Hannah's photograph in the hallway. "Last week I woke up after dreaming about her. Then I saw you beside me." Madeline looked at him. "What did you feel guilty?" The honesty surprised her. Caleb continued, "Then grateful, then guilty for feeling grateful." Madeline lowered her eyes. "I do not want Sophie to think I am replacing her mother. She does not. How do you know? Because she talks about Hannah with you." That was true. Sophie had begun asking Madeline questions about Ethan, too. Did he snore? Could he cook? Was he scared of anything? Madeline answered each one. In return, Sophie told her about Hannah's star-shaped toast, her singing voice, and the way she tucked notes inside lunchboxes. The dead had not disappeared from the new relationship. They had become part of its language. Madeline picked up the toothbrush. "It is blue." Sophie chose it. "I prefer white." Caleb smiled. "You can buy another one." She placed it back beside his. "This one is acceptable." The Compass Project's first major setback arrived during the 8th week. Elena stopped attending classes. She did not answer calls from the program coordinator. Mateo had also stopped coming to childcare. Caleb drove to her apartment after work. Madeline went with him. They found Elena sitting on the front steps while Mateo slept against her shoulder. Her landlord had increased the rent. She had taken a night cleaning job and could no longer attend morning training. "I knew this would happen," Elena said. "Programs like this work for people who have time." Madeline sat beside her on the concrete step. "You were offered a paid apprenticeship. It begins in 6 weeks. My landlord wants money now. I can cover the rent." Elena's expression closed. Caleb glanced at Madeline. She realized the mistake immediately. "I am sorry," she said. Elena looked away. Madeline tried again. "What would allow you to stay in the program without making you dependent on me?" Elena shifted Mateo carefully. "I need work I can do now." Caleb looked toward Madeline. The next day, the Compass Project created paid production assignments. Participants began restoring furniture for community centers, schools, and local businesses while completing training. Elena returned. Her first project was a damaged wooden desk from a public library. One afternoon, she ran her hand across the cracked surface and said she did not know how to begin. Caleb placed a small chisel beside her. "You do not repair the whole desk at once." "Then, what do I repair?" "The next piece." She worked on it for 3 weeks. When the desk was finished, Mateo crawled beneath it and announced that it was strong enough to become a house. Elena laughed until she cried. Madeline stood across the room watching. Caleb joined her. "You almost paid her rent," he said. "I was trying to help." "I know. I am learning. I know that too." Madeline looked at Elena and Mateo. Ethan used to help people without asking whether they wanted his method. Caleb smiled. "So you were not the only difficult person in the marriage. He was generous and impossible. You miss both." "Yes." Caleb slipped his hand into hers. She let him. By early spring, the warehouse no longer looked abandoned. Fresh glass filled the windows. The electrical system had been replaced. The West office had become a small business classroom. A bright childcare room occupied the corner nearest the garden doors. Caleb insisted on building the children's tables himself. Sophie and Mateo painted small compasses along the walls. Madeline's design team offered to correct the uneven shapes. She refused. The first graduation was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. 14 parents had begun the program. 12 completed it. One participant moved to care for an ill parent. Another accepted a job before finishing the final course. Madeline considered both departures successes. Caleb pointed out that 3 months earlier she would have called them deviations from the plan. "I have become flexible," she said. "You moved the ceremony schedule because the catering company changed the napkins. The original napkins were gray. They were white. They were warm white." Caleb looked at her. "You terrify me. You kissed me. I contain contradictions." The night before graduation, Caleb remained alone in the workshop after Sophie went to bed. He opened the wooden box. Ethan's silver compass rested inside. He had stopped wearing it every day. At first, that had felt wrong. Then he realized the necklace had done what Hannah believed it would do. It had found its way home. The question was where home existed now. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Madeline entered wearing one of his old work shirts over her clothes. "I thought you left." "I did." "Then Sophie called and said you forgot to eat dinner. She reports everything. She is very efficient." Madeline sat beside him. Her gaze moved to the open box. "You do not wear it often anymore." "No." Why Caleb lifted the compass. For years, this was proof that the mountain did not take everything. And now, he looked at her. "Now I have other proof." Madeline's expression softened. Caleb placed the compass in her hand. You should decide where it goes. We already decided it does not belong to one person. Deciding where it belongs is different. Madeline turned it over. The engraving caught the light. Always find your way home. She remembered fastening it around Ethan's neck in their first apartment. He had stood before a cracked mirror while she struggled with the clasp. She had slipped and scratched the silver. Ethan laughed. You damaged my gift. I improved it. How? Now no one can mistake it for theirs. For 8 years, Madeline had believed the scratch made the compass belong to them. Now she understood that the mark was only the beginning of its story. She closed her fingers around it. I have an idea. Graduation morning arrived beneath clear skies. Sunlight reflected from Elliott Bay and entered the warehouse through tall windows. Rows of chairs faced a simple wooden stage. Families filled the room, carrying flowers, cameras, restless children, and the nervous energy of people who had waited a long time to celebrate something. Caleb stood behind the stage curtain, adjusting his tie. Sophie walked around him with the authority of an event director. You have sawdust on your sleeve. It is part of the suit. It is not. It adds character. It looks dirty. Madeline approached and brushed the dust away. You missed a spot, she said. Caleb looked at her. I left it for authenticity. Sophie sighed. You both need supervision. She hurried toward the entrance to greet Noah and Laura Bennett. Grace arrived moments later, walking with a slight limp that remained from the mountain accident. It was the first time Caleb had seen her since the rescue. She embraced him without speaking. Then she held Madeline's hands. Your husband gave me every year I have lived since that night. Madeline's eyes filled. Use them well. I try. Ruth Callahan attended too. She was older now, with white hair and a careful way of walking. She carried a copy of the incident report in a leather folder. Madeline hugged her. No cameras were permitted inside except those invited by the families. The story belonged to the people in the room. Near the entrance stood a new display case covered with a white cloth. Sophie guarded it. When Caleb approached, she blocked his path. You cannot see it yet. I built the case. You built the outside. What is inside? A surprise. I dislike surprises. No, you dislike surprises you cannot fix. Madeline heard and smiled. She had worked with Sophie for 2 weeks on the display. Inside the case rested Ethan's silver compass. Beside it stood the restored rescue photograph. Ruth's handwritten report lay open to the page describing Ethan carrying Grace toward safety. A copy of Hannah's first search letter rested beneath it, written at the kitchen table before Sophie was born. There was also a photograph of Hannah holding the wooden box while Caleb addressed an envelope. The display did not belong only to Ethan. It honored the chain of people who had carried one act of courage forward. Ethan had saved Caleb. Caleb had preserved the compass. Hannah had continued the search. Sophie had understood that returning it did not require choosing one family over another. Madeline had turned the story toward others. The ceremony began at 3. Caleb walked onto the stage first. The applause made him pause. He searched the audience until he found Sophie in the front row. Madeline sat beside her. The sight settled him. When this program began, Caleb said we had a building with no heat, a broken electrical system, and a roof that leaked in 4 places. Madeline raised one finger. 3, she called from her seat. Caleb looked at her. We discovered the 4th later. Laughter moved through the room. He faced the graduates. Most of you arrived believing you needed to prove you were still capable. You did not. Elena wiped at her eyes. You did not lose your ability when you lost your spouse. You did not lose your value when life forced you away from a career. You came here with strength this program did not create. He lifted the first wooden compass from the table beside him. We only gave that strength a place to work. Each graduate walked across the stage. Raymond had accepted an apprenticeship with a local electrical company. Priya had returned to technical support and was helping design the project's digital training courses. Elena had opened a small furniture restoration service from a rented workshop. Her first employee was another parent from the program. When Elena received her compass, Mateo cheered louder than anyone. The compasses had no moving needle. On the back of each were 4 words: "Hope always points forward." After the final graduate returned to their seat, Sophie climbed onto the stage. She carried no notes. Caleb looked at Madeline. "Did you know about this?" Madeline shook her head. Sophie adjusted the microphone. "My dad says I talk too much." The audience laughed. Caleb covered his face. Sophie continued. "He also says some things are broken and some things are finished, but they are not the same." She looked toward the entrance. "My mom died when I was little. Ethan died before I knew him. I used to think people were either here or gone." Madeline's eyes filled. "But Mom helped Dad keep the necklace safe. Ethan helped Dad come home before I was born. So they are not just gone." Sophie turned toward Madeline. "They are part of why we are here." She stepped down from the stage and walked toward the covered display. Madeline joined her. Together they removed the cloth. The silver compass caught the afternoon light. The room became silent. Caleb stared at the items inside. He saw Hannah's handwriting. He saw Ethan's face. He saw the necklace he had carried through nearly 9 years of uncertainty. Beneath the display was an inscription carved into walnut. "Kindness is never lost. Sometimes it takes the long way home." Caleb looked at Madeline. She stood beside Sophie with tears on her cheeks. For once, she did not wipe them away. Madeline returned to the stage after the applause faded. She stood behind the microphone, but she did not open the prepared speech Nora had placed there. Instead, she looked at Ethan's compass. "For a long time, I believed that necklace was the last piece of my husband I had lost." Her voice carried through the warehouse. "I thought finding it would return something to me. I thought grief was a collection of missing objects, unfinished conversations, and doors that would never open again." She looked toward Laura Grace and Noah. "I was wrong." The room remained still. The last pieces of Ethan were not lost. They were carried by the people he helped. They were carried by a boy who watched a compass needle while a mountain collapsed around him. They were carried by a girl who survived because a stranger went back for her. They were carried by a man who kept searching for a name. They were carried by a woman who wrote letters even while her own life was changing. Caleb lowered his head. Madeline looked toward him. "Sometimes we believe moving forward means leaving someone behind. But love is not a room with only one chair." Sophie reached for Caleb's hand. "The people we lose remain part of every honest life we build afterward." Madeline paused. Her eyes met Caleb's. "For 8 years I believed happiness would mean I had forgotten Ethan. Then I met a man who understood that memory and love do not compete." Caleb's eyes filled. Madeline looked toward the graduates. "This building exists because people who had every reason to close their hearts chose to keep them open." She stepped away from the microphone. The room rose around her. The applause did not sound like the applause at the gala. There were no polished donors measuring impact or reporters searching for a headline. There were children calling their parents' names. There were widows and widowers holding wooden compasses. There were people celebrating the fact that they had reached a place they once believed was impossible. After the ceremony, the warehouse filled with food music and conversations. Madeline stood near the display while guests read the inscription. Some cried. Some touched the glass. A man she did not know left a note beneath the case saying his wife had died 6 months earlier, and he had not known how to ask for help. Nora found him before he left and introduced him to the program coordinator. Madeline watched from across the room. Caleb joined her carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her. She took a sip and made a face. "It is cold. You forgot about it. I just received it." "I forgot about it first." She held the cup anyway. Caleb looked toward the display. "You included Hannah. She belongs there. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did. He looked at the photograph of Hannah writing the search letter. She would have liked you. Madeline raised an eyebrow. You sound uncertain. She would have asked difficult questions. I appreciate difficult questions. No, you appreciate answering them. Madeline considered that. She still would have liked me. Caleb smiled. Yes. Madeline looked at Ethan's photograph. He would have liked you too. Even after I kept his necklace, he would have told you the clasp was always unreliable. Caleb laughed. The music changed to a slower song. Several graduates began dancing with their children near the stage. Caleb held out his hand. Madeline stared at it. What are you doing? Inviting you to dance. At a professional event. It stopped being professional when Mateo put frosting on the podium. Madeline glanced toward the dance floor. I do not dance. You run a technology company. That is unrelated. Technology rarely involves dancing. She looked at him. You remembered that. I remember most things you say. The answer quieted her. Madeline placed her hand in his. They moved toward the center of the room. Caleb was not an elegant dancer. Madeline discovered this immediately. You stepped on my shoe. It was in my way. It was beneath my foot. Exactly. She laughed. The sound caught her by surprise. Caleb's hand rested carefully at her waist. Sophie danced nearby with Noah and Grace moving between them without rhythm. Madeline looked around the room. For years, crowded spaces had made her feel alone. This one did not. Later that evening, after the guests left, Caleb, Madeline, and Sophie returned to Ethan's memorial garden. The sky was turning gold over Lake Washington. Sophie carried a small wooden compass. Caleb carried another. They walked along the stone path toward the cedar tree. Madeline stopped at Ethan's bench. Fresh lilies moved in the evening breeze. Sophie placed one wooden compass beneath the engraved words. A compass can show direction. Only compassion can show the way. Caleb looked at Madeline. What is the other one for, Hannah? Sophie said. The following morning they placed it beside Hannah's photograph in the workshop. On the back, Sophie had written 5 words in purple marker. You helped us get here. That evening, Madeline and Caleb stood alone in the memorial garden while Sophie collected stones near the path. Caleb touched Ethan's name carved into the bench. Do you ever feel guilty? Madeline did not need to ask what he meant. Every time I am happy. Me too. She took his hand. I am beginning to think happiness is not betrayal. Caleb looked at her. What is it? Madeline watched Sophie kneel beside the lilies. Proof that what they gave us survived. Caleb touched her cheek. This kiss was not uncertain. It did not ask whether the past allowed them to move forward. It accepted that the past had brought them there. Summer arrived quietly. The Compass Project began accepting applications for a second class. Elena returned as an assistant instructor. Raymond helped rewire a second workshop. Priya created an online course for parents who lived outside Seattle. Madeline spent one afternoon each week at the warehouse. At first, everyone became nervous when she entered a room. By August, participants called her Maddie. The first person to do it was Mateo. Madeline pretended to object. No one believed her. Caleb continued running Reed Restoration while teaching at the project. The leaking roof was finally repaired. Madeline did not pay for it. Caleb secured a contract restoring furniture for 3 community centers and used the first payment to hire another worker. He showed Madeline the paid invoice with more pride than she had seen him display at graduation. You were right, she said, about what kindness should not make someone smaller. Caleb placed the invoice in a drawer. You were right, too. Madeline waited. Money can help. She smiled. That sounded painful. It was. Their relationship remained imperfect. Madeline still worked too late. Caleb still refused help until refusal became unreasonable. They argued about schedules, school pickups, privacy, and whether Sophie was old enough to own a phone. Sophie usually joined the argument and supported whichever adult was most likely to agree with her. On the anniversary of Hannah's death, Madeline did not call Caleb into a meeting or attempt to fill the day. She arrived at the workshop with groceries. She cooked Hannah's favorite soup using a recipe Sophie had found. It tasted terrible. Caleb ate 2 bowls. On the anniversary of Ethan's death, Caleb drove Madeline to the North Cascades. They stood near the restored guardrail while rain moved across the mountains. Madeline placed a small bundle of cedar branches beside the road. She did not say goodbye. She had said goodbye many times. Instead, she told Ethan about the graduates, the display, and the little girl who believed he was part of her family. Caleb waited several steps away. When Madeline returned, he opened his arms. She went to him without hesitation. 1 year after the first graduation, the Compass Project occupied the entire waterfront warehouse. A second location had opened in Tacoma. Hundreds of families had received training childcare employment support or small business guidance. The numbers appeared in reports. The lives appeared in the building. Photographs of graduates covered the hallway. Children's drawings filled the childcare room. Wooden compasses rested on desks, shelves, and workbenches throughout the city. Madeline still led Vale Horizon. She remained demanding. She still corrected reports with red ink and expected meetings to begin on time. But her office had changed. Ethan's wedding photograph no longer rested face down inside a locked drawer. It stood on a shelf beside a photograph of Caleb and Sophie at the first graduation. Hannah's picture stood in the workshop beside the restored rescue photograph. Neither family hid the people who had come before. One Friday afternoon, Madeline entered Reed Restoration and found Sophie sitting at a new desk between Caleb's office and the main workshop. Above the desk hung a drawing. 5 people stood beneath a blue sky. Caleb held a hammer. Madeline held a briefcase. Sophie stood between them. Above the family were 2 stars, 1 silver, 1 gold. Madeline pointed to the drawing. "Why am I holding a briefcase?" "You always carry one." "I sometimes carry a handbag. It looks the same." Caleb stepped out of the office. "Do not argue with the artist." Madeline looked at him. "Why are you holding a hammer?" "Because she understands me." Sophie taped one final label beneath the picture. "My family." A new student entered the workshop with her young daughter. The girl pointed to the drawing. "Who are the stars?" Sophie looked up. "My mom, Hannah, and Ethan." "Are they in heaven?" Sophie considered the question. "Some of my family is here," she said. "Some of them helped us get here." The little girl nodded as though that made perfect sense. Madeline looked at Caleb. He reached for her hand. Evening settled over Seattle. After the final class ended, Madeline locked the front doors of the Compass Project. Inside the entrance, the silver compass caught the last light within its display case. The scratch near the clasp remained visible, so did the dent along the lower rim. No one had polished them away. Caleb waited outside beneath an umbrella with Sophie asleep against his shoulder. Madeline stepped into the rain and joined them. The umbrella was too small for 3 people. Caleb shifted it toward her. Water ran down his shoulder. "You are getting wet," Madeline said. "I noticed." "Move closer. There is nowhere to move." Madeline stepped against him anyway. Sophie stirred between them but did not wake. They walked toward the parking lot pressed together beneath the small umbrella. Behind them, light from the warehouse spread across the wet pavement. Through the glass doors, the inscription beneath Ethan's compass remained visible. Kindness is never lost. Sometimes it takes the long way home.